Welcome to the series of UGC lectures. Today, our topic of discussion is characteristics of growth rings, sapwood, heartwood, and reaction wood. So, before starting our topic, we will discuss some important headings. For example, what is primary growth? What is secondary growth? And how are growth rings formed? Now, we will discuss them one by one. Primary growth. Formation of the primary body of a plant results due to the continuous divisions in the apical meristem. It is responsible for the development of fundamental parts of the plant and to some extent growth in its thickness. This type of growth, called as primary growth, is completed within a few weeks of the first year of the plant. In lower vascular plants, like pteridophytes, and in a class of higher plants, that's monocots with a few exceptions, this primary structure remains as such throughout the life of the plant. It makes a plant structurally and functionally self-reliant. Now, secondary growth. In dicotyledons, secondary tissues are formed as a result of activities or divisions in the lateral meristem. That's vascular cambium and cork cambium. These secondary tissue result in increase in thickness of the plant. This addition of secondary tissue is known as secondary growth. The secondary growth continues for an indefinite period of time through numerous growing seasons. Hence, the diameter of main trunk, branch, as well as the roots continues to increase throughout the life of plant. Formation of growth rings, heartwood, sapwood, etc. It's the result of this activity. Now, what's growth ring? A growth ring may be defined as the amount of xylem tissues developed over one growth period and separated in time from adjacent tissues by a non-growing or dormant period. This is called tree ring or annual ring. Visible rings result from the change in the growth speed through the seasons of the year. Thus, one ring usually marks the passage of 1 year in the life of tree. These rings continue to grow in successive growing periods of the plant and are collectively known as growth rings. Growth rings are used to find the age of a tree. In areas where the climate is reasonably predictable, trees develop annual rings of different properties. Now, depending upon weather, rain, temperature, soil pH, plant nutrition, concentration of carbon dioxide, etc. in different years. These variations may be used to infer past climatic variations. Growth rings are clearly visible in a horizontal cross-section cut through the trunk of a tree. Growth rings are a result of new growth in the vascular cambium, a lateral meristem, and are synonymous with secondary growth. Growth rings are characteristic features of most trees and shrubs of temperate origin, both deciduous as well as evergreens, where the seasons differ more markedly. Plants grown in such regions show characteristic growth layers or growth rings due to periodic activity and quiescence of cambium under the influence of changing seasons. In tropical trees, growth rings are not usually distinguishable because of the comparative uniform season, except where there is an annual alteration in growth and dormant periods. The plants like Acacia tortilis, Thymelia hirsuta, where there are no growth rings, they produce same type of secondary wood throughout the growth season. Similarly, in the South California pine, that's Pinus radiata, the cambium is not fully dormant even in the winter. The evergreen and deciduous trees found in India do not always show distinguishable growth rings. Now, when a tail of stem or root is observed for growth rings, these appear as concentric or eccentric rings, each representing a year's growth of secondary xylem. When growth is truly seasonal and occurs once during a season, that is, one such ring is produced each year, then growth rings are generally referred as annual growth layers or annual growth rings. But there are trees, for instance Tamarix ephylla, in which two rings are produced in a single year. These are known as false rings. Now what are false rings? False rings happen when for a short period during the growing season, growing conditions resemble that of the end of the season. For example, when drier and colder conditions prevail for several days, and then there is again the renewal of warm season. A few layers of the thick-walled cells are formed during these days, and they have the appearance of late wood. A close inspection of suspicious ring will reveal that although cell walls are thicker, cell size has not really decreased, and the return to thinner walled cells is progressive, not sharp like it would be if spring had just returned. An annual ring with two or more false rings is sometimes called double wall or multiple rings. Some tree species, for example larch, known as Larix species, are notorious for having incomplete or even locally absent rings, most often due to high levels of defoliation by insects. In this case, the wood may be laid down only whichever side of the tree has sustained the least defoliation, as photosynthesis might happen there only. Now, variations in the growth rings. Growth rings show huge variations. These variations are of different kinds, like variation in the thickness of successive annual rings, or there may be only one ring per year, or there may be more than one growth ring per year, or xylem appears to grow continuously and have no rings. Rings may be closely spaced or widely spaced. Rings may be easily seen, as in conifers we have pine, and hardwoods, for example oak, or they may be non-distinguishable. These variations are due to fluctuations in the internal and external environment under which a plant grows, such as relative precipitation, temperature, light, humidity, water availability, photosynthesis, respiration balance, growth process, regulatory materials like hormones, auxins, gibberellic acid, carnitins, and cambial activity, stress factors, both abiotic and biotic. It has been observed that water availability and warmth of the growing season are the two main factors affecting tree ring width. A wet, warm season will lead to formation of white but light colored bands in most boreal evergreen trees, with ring width generally increasing with the length of the favorable growing season. On the other hand, unfavorable growth conditions like dry or cold summers will result in narrower rings. Crowding from neighboring trees also narrows width of the growth rings. If rings are narrow on one side of a tree with wider rings on the other side, that means the tree was crowded on the side of the tree where the rings are narrow. Such injuries like defoliation, severe accidents to the tree, severe pruning, change in soil drainage, and fertilization also have a negative impact on the width of growth rings. Furthermore, a tree's response to growing conditions is species specific. One might respond strongly to the changes in overall rainfall, drought, crowding, etc. Another might be more sensitive to the amount of rainfall during the late summer, and another to a temperature change that alters the length of the growing season. Each growth ring is composed of two bands of cells, the early wood and the late wood. These are distinctly visible because of the seasonal differences in amount, shape, size, type and arrangement of the cells developing from the cambium. These are commonly known as spring wood and summer wood respectively, but are not strictly in use because in some plants the two bands of rings are not so restricted seasonally, even in temperate areas. The terms summer wood and fall wood, previously used for early and late wood respectively, are no longer in use now, since in most trees no wood is formed in autumn and some wood commonly develops in spring. The early wood is laid down in the spring and early summer when water, growth regulators and carbohydrate availability is highest. These factors initiate the activity of cambium. It is the season when new buds, leaves, flowers are formed and therefore more water and minerals are to be translocated within the plant body. Hence, the cambium is more active. The wood formed in this season consists of relatively broad xylem vessel with large lumen, having smaller amount of wall substance per unit volume. The wood forms a light colored band. Now, the late wood. Late wood or the summer wood is produced later on in the summer and in the early fall. Growth is practically negligible during autumn. There is no need of having an elaborate system for water conduction. The change in carbohydrate production and allocation patterns as well as shifting growth regulation signals compel the cambium to generate less amount of xylem elements with somewhat smaller lumen than the early wood elements, having larger amount of wall substance per unit volume. This accounts for the darker color of late wood. These differences between the cell size and color of the two bands of the wood of the same year emphasize the growth rings. At the end of the growing season, wood production shuts down until the following spring when large thin-walled cells are again produced by the cambium, making a very sharp contrast with the previous year's dark light late wood. Now we will discuss heartwood and sapwood. Heartwood. Heartwood and sapwood do not characterize any specific group of plants. They exist in almost all types of plants that show growth rings. The two woods show definite cellular differentiation. Sapwood is the younger, occupies peripheral position in the growing season. It is the living wood and has two important functions: to conduct water from roots to the leaves and to store up and give back according to the season the reserves prepared in the leaves. All wood in a tree is first formed as sapwood. The more leaves a tree bears and the more vigorous its growth, the larger the volume of the sapwood required. Hence, trees making rapid growth in the open have thicker sapwood for their size than trees of the same species growing in dense forests. Now, what's heartwood actually? Heartwood is the hard central region of a tree trunk made up of xylem vessels that are no longer involved in water transport. Heartwood is formed as a result of a naturally occurring biochemical and anatomical transformation in the elements of secondary xylem. As secondary growth proceeds, all living cells lose their protoplasts. The cell sap is withdrawn and becomes filled with organic compounds such as oils, gums, resins, tannins, aromatic and coloring material. These compounds are commonly called extractives. The wood becomes dark colored due to accumulation of these substances. In many woods, eggshell or ray parenchyma surround the trachary elements. Some of them protrude into the trachary elements through the pit. These ingrowths are called tyloses. They develop in the lumina of the trachary elements. Several tyloses may be formed by the surrounding parenchyma. These tyloses increase, come with one another and completely fill and then block the vessel. As a result, trachary elements become inactive and water conduction through the heartwood stops. The wood becomes more resistant to decay. Heartwood formation occurs spontaneously. It is a genetically programmed process. Once heartwood formation is complete, the heartwood is dead. Some uncertainty still exists as to whether heartwood is truly dead, as it can still chemically react to decay organism according to the Shikun. Now, the conversion of sapwood to heartwood is gradual. There is a region in the heartwood which is neither heartwood nor sapwood. Such a portion is called heartwood-sapwood interface. It is this zone where different chemical substances originate, where precursors are converted into ultimate products, that is extractives. The accumulation of extractives occurs in parenchymatous tissues. Ultimately, this parenchymatous tissue dies and transmission zone is pushed outwards. This increases the diameter of the heartwood. There are certain trees in which no conversion of sapwood to heartwood takes place and parenchyma remains alive throughout. For example, Populus deltoides or Populus tremuloides, Sambucus nigra. Now, heartwood may or may not be much darker than living wood. For example, Abies alba and Picea species. It may or may not be sharply distinct from the sapwood. However, other processes such as decay can discolor wood. Even in woody plants, they do not form heartwood with a similar color differences which may lead to confusion. The term heartwood derives solely from its position and not from any vital importance to the tree. This is evidenced by the fact that a tree can thrive well with its heartwood completely decayed. Some species begin to form heartwood very early in life, so having only a thin layer of live sapwood, while in others the changes come slowly. Thin sapwood is characteristic of such species like chestnut, mulberry, black locust, and pine. Thick sapwood is the rule. Heartwood as timber is more durable than sapwood because of the reduction of food materials available for microbial propagation. Formation of resins, tannins, oils, and blocking of vessels by tyloses and gums render the wood less prone to decaying organisms. For these reasons, heartwood is commercially more valuable than sapwood. There is no definite relation between the annual rings of growth and the amount of sapwood. Within the same species, the cross-sectional area of the sapwood is very roughly proportional to the size of the crown of the tree. If the rings are narrow, more of them are required than where they are wide. As the tree gets larger, the sapwood must necessarily become thinner or increase materially in volume. Sapwood is thicker in the upper portions of the trunk of a tree than near the base because the age and the diameter of upper sections are less. Now we will discuss softwood and hardwood. It is common to classify wood as either softwood and hardwood depending upon the absence and presence of vessels respectively. The wood from most of the gymnosperms like conifers and cycads have tracheids only and it is called softwood. Wood from angiosperms, usually broad-leaved trees, for example oak, consist of both tracheids as well as vessels, is called hardwood. The names are a bit misleading as hardwoods are not necessarily hard and softwoods are not necessarily soft. The well-known balsa, a hardwood, is actually softer than commercially softwood. Conversely, some softwood that's view is harder than many hardwoods. Now we will discuss porous wood and non-porous wood. The terms non-porous wood and porous wood are also used for softwood and hardwood respectively. Porous wood is further classified in two groups. We have ring porous wood and diffuse porous wood. In some plants, annual rings are often rendered conspicuous by localization of vessels in the early wood or by the formation of more numerous and somewhat larger vessels in the early wood than in the late wood, as in species of Castanea, Fraxinus, and some species of Quercus, thus forming a region of more or less open and porous tissues. The rest of the ring produced in summer is made up of smaller vessels and a much greater portion of wood fibers. Such wood is known as ring porous wood. Ring porous vessels conduct more water as it is formed when the need for water is great. Now we will discuss diffuse porous wood. When the vessels are fairly uniformly scattered through the ring, as in species of Betula, Acer, and Populus, where the transition in size or abundance is gradual from the early wood to late wood. Like in Juglans and Malus, the wood is called diffuse porous. Between these types, no line can be drawn and many wood are of distinctly intermediate type in this respect. Now we will discuss reaction wood. Reaction wood is a type of wood that's formed under the influence of different stress vectors. Reaction wood also develops in vertical stems under natural conditions and may be related to slight deflections, possibly due to uneven growth of the stem. Its distribution around the stem at different heights is spiral or irregular. As the reaction wood is formed when a tree is tilted at an angle from the vertical, so the tree on the edge of a patch of degrading permafrost, on the edge of an eroding slope, or trees tilted by the push of the snow during an avalanche will all exhibit reaction wood, starting as soon as the event happens or in the following spring if the tilting happened in the winter. Reaction wood is usually darker than normal wood and appears only on one side of the tree for each tilt event. A large number of experiments so far conducted have shown that reaction wood is usually a response to a stimulus to gravity. In gymnosperms, that's conifers, it develops on the underside of the leaning trunk or branch, while in dicotyledons, that is angiosperms, it develops on the upper side. Reaction wood of the conifers is termed as compression wood, and of the angiosperms it is termed as tension wood. Gymnosperms produce compression wood, which is produced by the local increased activity of the cambium on the lower side of the stem. The reaction wood on the tilt side of the trees tries to push itself back up. Typical compression wood is recognizable by the presence of eccentric growth rings and is 20 to 40% heavier than the normal wood of the same species. Being heavier, it is more brittle and capable of unusually high and irregular longitudinal shrinkage, but of less transverse shrinkage. As a result of these variations in shrinkage property, lumber containing compression wood twists as it dries out. In compression wood, there is more gradual transition between early wood and late wood. The tracheids of compression wood are seen to be rounded in cross section, and intercellular spaces can be found between them. The microfibrils of cellulose in the secondary wall of these tracheids are oriented in such a way as to form a large angle with a longitudinal axis of the cells. The inner layer of the secondary wall is absent, and the inner surface of the middle layer towards the lumen is helically grooved and ribbed. The grooves are deep. Helical grooves are lacking, as in Ginkgo biloba. The walls of compression wood tracheids that are formed in the spring are slightly thicker than those of normal wood. The compression wood tracheids are shorter and have callose depositions, unlike those of the normal wood. There is usually a somewhat higher lignin content in compression wood than in the normal wood. Now we will discuss tension wood. Tension wood is formed by angiosperms on the side opposed to the tilt by trying to pull them back up. Like that of compression wood, its presence is recognized in a stem by the formation of eccentric growth rings. This asymmetry is the result of more rapid or more continuous cambial activity on one side of the stem. Histologically, the distinguishable feature of tension wood is the presence of gelatinous fibers. Various workers have found that it is the gelatinous wall layer that is mainly responsible for the contraction of the tension wood. There is also less lignin in tension wood than in the normal wood, but the amount of cellulose is higher. It has been suggested that the absence of hemicelluloses and lignin is responsible for the looser connection between the cellulose fibrils of the gelatinous layers of tension wood. This completes today's topic. Hope you might have understood the topic well.